series on the family, which we've entitled My Family Under Construction or Demolition. First week we talked about getting our own act together in terms of our reactions, our attitudes that we display in the home as being the key, the foundation. That as we get our act together, we can begin to think about getting our family together. Last week we talked about the husband and wife relationship and some of the important building blocks and components of a husband-wife relationship. And just like the previous 2 weeks, this week is also going to be a jet plane view of another aspect of family life, and that's parent-child relationship. Call it Here Come the Kids, I guess. And as we consider this matter of children, I'd like to first of all get you thinking about your goals for your children. What do you want to see your children become? What would you like to see them develop into? Now, so often we give thought to their health and their wealth. We like to see them financially stable, a provider, a responsible adult in good physical condition. We think in terms of education. But what about their spiritual life? Do you have any goals for them? Personally, I've come to the conclusion that I think most United States Christians have a goal that's far too low. That if their children can become moral, church-going people, they'll be satisfied. And I don't think that's what the Bible speaks of as God's goal. The Bible says that God's goal for each of us as his children, no matter who we might be, is that we would be a love slave of Jesus Christ. That we would love him more than anyone or anything else. That in our hearts we're willing to do whatever he says. If it's a matter of living in an igloo in Alaska for his purposes, or a jungle hut off somewhere in some exotic country, or inner city, whatever, that doesn't matter if God wants something like that. And as I've considered this for my family, my wife and I have talked about it, we have come to the conclusion that no matter what it takes, that what we would really like to see of our kids is that they would love God, love Jesus Christ, love his word, and be a caring, loving Christian who witnesses, who reaches out to others. And that's all we really care about. And I mean by that, without getting up into some platitude somewhere, that if it should mean that in God's wisdom he should sacrifice something in the terms of their health or their wealth or their education to achieve that end, that's okay with us. Why can we say that? If we go back to what we were talking about the last 2 weeks. Because that's what we've decided for ourselves. Personally, I would rather be in a wheelchair, in the place where I should be in my hard attitudes and my love for God, than to be healthy, wealthy, and living in sin. And I've had to tell the Lord this regarding areas of my life. Lord, I don't care what it takes. Get rid of it. And I think with our children, we're so prone to give priority to the health, wealth, and education aspects that we're willing to sacrifice the other. And so I think goals is a good place to begin. What do you really want to see your kids become? Where are you taking them? Well, if all you care about is that they stay out of trouble with the law, you're a good neighbor, fine, that's your goals. A lot of what I say today might not have a lot of application to you. But for those that perhaps would want to shoot a little higher and care to see their kids maybe go another direction, then perhaps we've got some things to consider. Because I think of 3 key building blocks, which I think are significant if you really want to see your kids turn out living for God. Number 1, a real key area is demonstrated love. of parent for child. And I don't mean just that you feel some feeling inside, but you are demonstrating to that child that you care, that they can see it and feel it. You know, it's not enough for you to know that you love someone. What counts is that they sense and feel that you love them. And so whether it's a husband-wife relationship or parent-child, this is critical. And so this means, in demonstrated love, obviously, to begin with, that we express it. And I know this is tough for some of you introvertish guys who just have a hard time getting those kind of expressions out towards your wife to begin with, usually. You say, no, I love her, 2 years ago I did this for her, No. When's the last time you told her that you loved her? Well, with our children, the same is true. They need to be convinced. They need to be sold on it. You really care for them. And so verbally expressing it is foundational. But beyond that, how can we do this? Well, one key area is your time, your use of your time, your availability to your children. For some of us, that means putting down the newspaper when our little one wants attention. For a housewife, it's a challenge. You're involved in mixing the batter, and all you can think of is that company that's due very quickly, and as usual, you're behind schedule with everything, and here comes a child wanting attention. Well, it might mean mixing the batter and holding a conversation at the same time instead of chasing them off. There might be times when the kids have to be chased off, but what I'm saying is, as a pattern, that we just don't crowd these kids out, but that we give them time, make ourselves available to them. Another way in which we demonstrate our love is our concern when they are hurt. It provides a real opportunity to draw alongside. One friend of mine told me that when she was younger, she had a serious illness for weeks that went on, and doctors weren't sure what they could do for her. And her father just dropped everything else he was doing, and every spare minute he had outside of his employment, he was in her room, spending time with her. And she said up until then, he was just a father, But after that point in time, which when she was about 8 or 9 years old, she said he was just special. And it was a special bond between them. He cared. I had a football coach, or rather saw and observed a football coach in our conference that I think is just the opposite of what we should be. And yet I've seen some parents that are similar to this. I was on the field one time when one of his fellows got hurt, laying on the ground and moaning a bit, and the coach came out personally and looked down at this fellow and said, "You lazy no good, get up off there." He said, "You think I'm sending the substitute for you? You're crazy. Get back in the huddle," And I found out after the game from some of his players, this is his general way of treating people that are hurt. He's, first of all, very suspicious that they're not really hurt all that bad. And he's got no sympathy at all for injuries. It just, you're going to tough it. Now, he produced some tremendous teams, but frankly, I wouldn't want to play for that guy. And I've seen parents, that the kid falls and hurts himself, and they get a lecture on the proper way of walking or running. There they are hurting, and Papa or Mama's using it as an occasion for a sermon, And there's a place for that too. But there are these times when they're hurting that we get a chance to demonstrate we care, that we know how to sympathize and empathize. And sure, they shouldn't have done it, But at this point in time, it wouldn't hurt to just ooze out a little bit of that sympathy you've got and demonstrate to them so they see it that you care. Another way of demonstrating our love is interest in their affairs. Now, personally, I've had a hard time with an aspect of this. For instance, I've always tried to ask my kids during the day as I see them at supper how things went at school and get as much involved and interested in their affairs as I can. It's tough to remember the names of all the kids that they're involved with because they mentioned Jimmy 2 weeks ago and he's the one with the blue bike. You're supposed to know all about it and have this thing all put together. It's tough. But, as we make a move to be involved in their affairs, and hey, how about that test you took today? I was praying for you at work today. How'd it go? It goes a long way with our kids, demonstrating our love. Another key area, I think, where we're all guilty of demonstrating something other than our love is the way we react to their mistakes and faults. Very often what we communicate is rejection. I've had it up to here with you, kid, or this beautiful statement that we come out with. You always, da-da-da-da-da-da, make some sweeping statement about this kid's character or his behavior and bring up a series of things from the past, No, Demonstrating love and concern, acceptance, even a time when correction is necessary, that this child knows that he's accepted. There's an environment of love in our house where they sense they're accepted, no matter who they are, no matter what they are. And as they approach teenage years, this becomes especially critical, that a teenager realizes that sure, you don't approve of some things they've been doing, but you're not rejecting them because of it. That you accept them as they are if they never change. You love them as your child. Really key. And so, demonstrated love. Very key. Secondly, consistent discipline. And I know I'm getting into a touchy area when I talk about this thing of discipline. The papers have carried stories of child abuse. We have all kinds of extremes in this thing. Remember, first of all, when I talk about this thing of discipline, I'm again assuming that there's a climate of love in the home. In a sense, there's this cocoon of love, this thing that envelops the household. And so that discipline is done in the context of kids knowing they're accepted and they're loved. And the correction is coming from people who care enough to attempt to guide this in life. I'd like you, if you would, to turn to the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament. We'll look at some verses on this matter of discipline. Proverbs 13th chapter, first of all. I don't see as many teenagers here as I did the first session. If some of you want to let out a groan when you see these verses as teenagers, that's okay, I don't mind. But just remember, I didn't write this book, God did. Proverbs 13 and verse 24. First of all, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Move on to the 19th chapter and verse 18. Discipline your son while there's hope. And it's really true. The older a child gets before he gets proper discipline, the harder it becomes to deal with. Difficult situation. Chapter 22, Proverbs 22 and verse 15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. I know as we look down at those sweet little innocent things laying in the crib when they're first home from the hospital, it's hard to believe that that child could ever have a wrong attitude or do anything wrong. But lo and behold, it isn't too long before they start demonstrating that there's something going on inside that isn't quite the way it should be. And foolishness is one of those things which comes along. And the Lord says that discipline will affect that. Chapter 23. I think the Lord must have known that one verse wouldn't be enough on this subject, so he had to sort of give us a lot to go on. Proverbs 23 and verse 13. Do not hold back discipline from the child, all you timid parents. Although you beat him with the rod, he will not die. You might think that sometimes by the way they yell, but honestly, it's not so. Proverbs 29. And verse 15 and verse 17. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. The rod and reproof give wisdom. Now, if there's nothing else we can say from these verses, we can say this, that a parent disciplining his or her child has his authority for doing so from God. God is saying that's the thing to do. I can recall some friends of ours who were really taken in by the psychology and philosophy that came in a few years back that said that any form of discipline or holding down of your child was repression and would produce severe psychological problems later on and so on. And they felt the thing to do as Christian parents was to allow their child free expression. And so this meant that his every whim and desire was to be satisfied. So if you were to go into that child's bedroom when it was younger, you'd see the walls and the ceiling around the bed totally torn up, whether it was a knife or a crayon or a paintbrush, whatever that kid felt like doing in his area of the world, that was the thing to do. And as he got older, it got more interesting. You'd come into their home, and as you opened the door, you had to be careful because there was a trampoline in the living room. Up north, they don't have the nice warm weather we do here, and so the trampoline can't be outside all the time. And so if this kid wanted a trampoline in the living room, that's where the trampoline was. And this is the truth. And these are Christian people. In fact, there are a lot of people here, if I gave the names of this family, you'd know them. They're in leadership. And there was a trampoline taking up the entire living room. That was their child's desire. Well, needless to say, by the time this boy was 10, 11, 12 years of age, teachers couldn't handle him. Church, Sunday school teachers and so on couldn't handle him. And the parents realized they had goofed. And they had some problems. On the other hand, I've known some parents who just seem to strike out at their children with the back of their hand in anger, who, for no rhyme or reason sometimes, just get on their children. Often it's just an angry reaction. Beat their children. As I mentioned earlier, we see articles on child abuse. We're not talking about this at all when we talk about discipline, but I am convinced, my wife and I have been around long enough now, and our children, we've got 4. Well, as of next week, we'll have our 4th teenager in the house. And so we've been through this a bit, and we're convinced that this matter of handling of discipline has really been key in our household. And so I'd like to give some guidelines on this thing of discipline, what we mean by it, and sort of some tips along the way. Number one, when there's discipline, it's for violation of clear, realistic standards. By clear, I mean that the child understands exactly what's involved, that it's a simple case of right versus wrong on something that's being made clear to them, and they know it's wrong, period. By realistic, I mean taking into account their age, who they are as an individual. Though you have 4, 5, 6, 8 kids, you're going to find out that every one of them is an individual. They're different in what you can expect from them and so on. And so I am making this qualification that when there's discipline involved, it's violation of a clear, realistic standard. I might just give you a little tip. Something my wife and I practiced, and I found out after the first service, there was another family that's done something similar. And that was this, that our children knew exactly at what point spanking was coming. It's very often difficult. It's a blurry area when, sure, you've got the rule, but there's always some twist to circumstances. There's company, or perhaps the kid didn't realize that you wanted such and such done in such and such a way. And then, two, there's never a clear picture as to when they move from having disturbed you to having gone over into this territory where you're going to do something about it. And usually as parents, what we do, we tell them to do something and they don't respond right away, so we repeat it with a little louder volume, and you catch yourself, the volume's going up, 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 and then finally spanking, Well, the kids are never quite sure, how many times you're going to go up with the volume before that spanking's coming, and sometimes, in fact, you say it once and then you spank, and they never quite have a feel for this. And as parents, it's hard to know, too. Well, what we did, we took something we had used in youth work and applied it to our family. We had the 5-count system. That was when we gave a command on something that they knew to do, and they didn't respond immediately. We started counting to 5. And as soon as they heard the move towards 5, they knew at 5 meant spanking if that particular thing wasn't done. If we had told them, get in your bedroom, start getting ready for bed. If they weren't in that bedroom by 5, spanking. And it was very non-emotional, Just very calmly say, sorry, you understood that you were to be in bed in the bedroom by 5, and you knew about 5 count, and I went slowly. You weren't there. Sure, you were one step away, but you weren't in the bedroom. Now, this might sound cruel, but that's exactly the way it has to work. Just very simple, very clear, and consistent. Stick right with it. You deviate, you make it 1 step's okay now, then they're going to argue, why not 2.5 steps, I was almost 1 step away. You need that line. And it's a very clear understanding, and there's no problem. In fact, you'll find out that some of you know this, that the others sit in judgment on this whole thing. And if you aren't consistent, if you give leeway with this one, and you allowed 1 step outside the door for this one, and just a week ago you spanked this one, and they were 1 step away, or, you've got to stick right with it. Otherwise, your kids are going to be on your back and say, how come you didn't do it the same way this time? Now, a little secret. My kids didn't find this out until the first hour today. That you can use this, parents, to your own advantage. You can handle this thing any way you want to. There's flexibility in it. For instance, if the children have really been real good. Today's been sort of a hectic day, maybe a lot of company, a lot of turmoil, and you realize maybe there's some fun things going on, and you say, all right, it's time for bed. And they lollygog, and so you start the 5 count. And you see that they're really having a hard time wanting to go to bed. It's been so much fun, there's been a lot going on and so on. Well, you can count a little slower. They don't know that. And if you see they're sort of heading down the hallway, you can sort of hesitate between 4 and 5. There's a little bit of flexibility on your part on this thing that's not all that obvious, and really, it's taking into account the circumstances and so on. On the other hand, let's say that, they've taken you right to that point all day long. They've been pressing you, just going the very limit to see how much they can get away with. And, it's been 4.5. Everything you've counted on today, they've taken you to that 4.5 count, and they just barely made it, And you can tell it inside. There's attitudes developing aren't too good. Okay, just count. There you go. Boom, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're shocked. You got to 5 already. That's okay. The rule was 5. And you haven't raced through it, but you've just followed through consistently. And guess what? We have a spanking, and things clear. I don't know if you ever had this experience, but the air clears. When an issue is dealt with, it just seems like the whole thing lifts, and harmony's back and restored again in the household. But this matter of having clear standards, realistic, and being consistent is very key. Another thing, before there's punishment, before there's a spanking, there should always be an explanation so that it's sure that it's clear as to what's been done. Now, you know that I said such and such. And even though you knew it, and I reminded you, you went ahead anyhow, and you decided you wanted to do this anyhow. And it just isn't going to work that way. Now, God's put me in the family here to be in charge, and you're my child, and I love you. If I didn't love you, I'd just say, go do what you please. But I care about you, and we can't let you get going on this. And if you're just going to go this way, it's going to be trouble for you. And so, we're going to have a spanking. And this will help you remember that this does not go. And so we have our spanking. An explanation ahead of time with a spanking, followed by another talk to find out if the message got through. For instance, let's say it's been an attitude problem, and they're just, stubborn on something.